Good evening, and welcome to Cross-Examination. Tonight, we delve into a highly contentious issue that is dividing towns and cities across the world. Should public monuments be protected regardless of the history they represent? These bronze and stone figures often occupy our most prominent public spaces. But what happens when their legacy is one of pain and controversy for a significant portion of the community? To debate this complex topic, I am joined by two distinguished guests. Dr. Alistair Finch, a historian and author who advocates for the preservation and contextualization of all historical artifacts, and Ms. Lena Petrova, a community activist and sociologist who argues that our public spaces must reflect our modern, inclusive values. Welcome to you both.
Thank you, Isabel. It is a pleasure to be here. It is imperative that we approach this topic with a long-term perspective, not one clouded by the emotions of the present moment. Public monuments, regardless of the figures they depict or the actions they commemorate, are primary historical documents. They are tangible artifacts of a specific time, reflecting the values, beliefs, and, yes, even the profound flaws of the era in which they were erected. To remove them, based on contemporary sensibilities, would be tantamount to tearing pages out of our history books, simply because we find them uncomfortable or offensive. The great danger lies in creating a sanitized and, therefore, fundamentally inaccurate version of our collective past. History is not meant to be a simple, comforting narrative. It is complex, challenging, and very often contradictory. These statues provide a crucial, unmissable starting point for education and for difficult, but necessary, public conversations. They force us to ask difficult questions. Why was this person celebrated by the society that erected this statue? What does their legacy, both positive and negative, tell us about our society's evolution? The solution is not removal, which is an act of erasure, but addition. We should be adding plaques, developing educational walking tours, and creating digital resources like QR codes or augmented reality overlays that provide a full, unvarnished context. Furthermore, we must ask who gets to decide what is unacceptably offensive and what is not. If we remove statues of colonial figures today because their actions are now viewed as exploitative, who might be next tomorrow? A military general whose victories involved great loss of life? A politician who held views now considered archaic? This creates a, quote, slippery slope where our historical landscape is perpetually altered by transient political winds, with each generation wiping clean the slate of the last. By preserving and contextualizing these monuments, we are not endorsing their values. We are committing to the principle that all of our history must be remembered, studied, and understood.
Thank you, Isabel. And thank you, Dr. Finch. Dr. Finch speaks of monuments as if they are dusty, inert relics in a temperature-controlled museum. They are not. They are placed in positions of immense honor in our public squares, in our parks, and directly outside our most important civic buildings. Their placement, their scale, and their very existence is an act of ongoing, active celebration, not passive remembrance. And so, we must question who, exactly, we are choosing to celebrate in the 21st century. These are not merely historical artifacts. They are powerful symbols that have a real, daily, and often painful impact on people's lives. For the descendants of those who were enslaved, colonized, or oppressed by the very figures immortalized in bronze, these statues are a constant and painful reminder of historical trauma. They send a clear and unambiguous message that the suffering of their ancestors is of little consequence to the society that maintains these monuments. This is a matter of public well-being and social justice. If we want our cities to be genuinely inclusive spaces where all citizens feel a sense of belonging, we cannot continue to glorify figures who stood for division, subjugation, and violence. This is not about erasing history, a charge I find both misleading and unhelpful. The history of these individuals is well documented in books, in academic papers, and in museums, which are the appropriate venues for such critical study and reflection. This is about ceasing to honor them in our shared spaces. Removing a statue from a public square does not erase a historical fact. It makes a collective statement about the values we hold today. It declares that as a community, we have evolved and are committed to building a future that is more just and equitable for everyone, not just a select few.
Thank you both for those compelling opening statements. Dr. Finch, you advocate strongly for contextualization. Ms. Petrova, let me put this to you first. Why is adding a plaque or a detailed explanation not a sufficient compromise? Couldn't that serve the educational purpose Dr. Finch mentioned, while also acknowledging the controversy?
A plaque is, with all due respect to the doctor, a whisper against the shout of a 20-foot bronze statue on a massive pedestal. The visual power of a glorified, celebrated figure completely overwhelms a small block of text that, realistically, most people will not stop to read. It's an inadequate solution because it fails to address the core issue, the honor and prominence given to the individual. It doesn't change the fact that a community is being asked to walk past a celebratory effigy of a person who may have been responsible for the brutalization of their ancestors. It's a token gesture, a way to appease critics without making any meaningful change. It maintains an offensive and painful status quo.
Dr. Finch, Ms. Petrova describes these statues as a source of ongoing, daily psychological harm to members of the community. From your perspective as a historian, how does the principle of historical preservation justify that human cost?
I do not dismiss the pain that people feel. That pain is real and rooted in deep historical injustices. It is the very heart of the issue. However, I firmly believe that confronting our history, in all its profoundest comfort, is ultimately more productive for a society than hiding it away. History itself is full of pain. Should we tear down the Colosseum in Rome because it was a venue for brutal gladiatorial games and the persecution of minorities? Should we demolish the pyramids because they were built by a society that relied on forced labor? Of course not. These monuments serve as powerful, if unsettling, catalysts for dialogue. They force us to have the very conversation we are having tonight. Removing the statue doesn't heal the historical trauma. I fear it merely sweeps it under the rug, allowing future generations to forget why the controversy existed in the first place. A society must be mature and resilient enough to face its own past without sanitizing it for comfort.
If I may, this is not a dialogue. A dialogue is between people, an exchange of ideas. A statue is a monologue. It is a statement of power, cast in metal, proclaiming, quote, "This person was great," and, quote, "Their values are to be admired." It offers no room for debate in the public square. It dominates it. The dialogue you speak of, Dr. Finch, happens in classrooms and broadcast studios like this one, spaces designed for that purpose. Out there, in the public square, that statue stands as an oppressive symbol, reinforcing old hierarchies of power. Furthermore, this is also a practical issue. While we spend public funds maintaining a monument to a slave trader or a colonial oppressor, that money could be used differently. It could fund educational programs, community centers, or public art that truly helps heal the wounds of the past and builds a better future. It's a matter of resource allocation that reflects our priorities.
But the resources required for maintenance are often minimal compared to the immense cultural and historical value they provide as artifacts. And you are proposing a very different, and I believe more dangerous, solution. Moving from contextualization to outright removal and potential destruction. If we follow that path, I ask again, where does it end? Do we remove statues of early political figures who held views on race or gender that are abhorrent to us today, but were commonplace in their time? We risk judging the past by the standards of the present with a dangerous degree of righteousness. creating a bland and ahistorical public space. A museum or a dedicated, thoughtfully designed, quote, park of fallen monuments could be a powerful compromise. That way, we preserve the object for study and reflection without celebrating it in a central square. That is a far better alternative than destruction or removal from public access entirely.
That sounds like a reasonable middle ground, Ms. Petrova. A park of fallen monuments, where these statues could be moved and contextualized. Why isn't that a viable solution?
It is certainly a more productive suggestion than simply leaving them in place. I will grant that. However, it still requires significant public expenditure to carefully remove, transport, and rehouse these enormous objects. This is money and energy that could be directed towards creating new public works, towards celebrating unsung heroes from our communities, or towards initiatives that address ongoing inequality. My question is, why must we continue to center these divisive figures in our conversations and our civic planning at all? Let museums acquire them if they have the historical merit. Otherwise, let us move on.
Because to move on is to forget. It is an act of deliberate amnesia. These figures, divisive as they are part of our story. They shaped the world we live in, for better or for worse. To hide them away is to pretend that power structures and historical injustices simply appeared out of nowhere. Keeping them visible, albeit in a new context like a park, forces us to acknowledge the foundations of our society. It keeps the memory of struggle alive, not just for the descendants of the oppressed, but for the descendants of the oppressors too, who must also understand this history.
Our public squares and parks should be spaces where every member of the community feels welcome, respected, and safe. That should be our guiding principle. Continuing to glorify figures who represent oppression is fundamentally incompatible with that essential goal. This isn't about forgetting our history. It is about choosing who we, as a collective, decide to celebrate and put on a pedestal. Let's place our complex and painful history in museums and universities, where it can be properly studied and debated with the seriousness it deserves. And let's fill our shared public spaces with art and monuments that inspire us, that represent our collective aspirations for unity, and that honor the struggles and triumphs of all our people. Let's build a landscape that looks towards a more inclusive and hopeful future, not one that is perpetually chained to its most painful past.
Our history, with all its blemishes, its complexities, and its uncomfortable truths, is our inheritance. It is not something we can pick and choose from. It is a complex tapestry, and if we start pulling at the threads we dislike, the entire picture will unravel into meaninglessness. These monuments, these statues, are a vital part of that tapestry. They are the tough, knotted threads that give the whole fabric its texture and its strength. To preserve them, and to add layers of deep context and robust education, is an act of intellectual honesty and civic maturity. It demonstrates a commitment to understanding the totality of our past, not just the parts that align with our present values. Let us not create historical voids that will only leave future generations with a fragmented and incomplete story to learn from. Let us trust them with the whole, difficult truth.
And that is where we must leave it for tonight. My sincere thanks to Dr. Alistair Finch and Ms. Lena Petrova for their passionate and thought-provoking perspectives on this vital issue. You've given us all much to consider about how we remember our past and how we decide to shape our future. Thank you for watching Cross-Examination. Good night.